Can we see me? Can we hear me? Don't freak out. It's just a different hat. I'm banking on you being able to hear me right out of the gate. Don't freak out. It's just a different hat. I'm pretty sure I left the actual hat in the passenger seat of our car that the wife currently has at work. So I had to improvise with one of her hats. Although the number of times that I've been running around before a stream trying to find the hat, I don't think there is a number. I don't think there is a number high enough for the number of times I've had to do that. But I always find it at the last second, except for today. It was bound to happen. Oh, thank you. You know, the wife made it. She crochets. And so I know she has like a whole drawer in her dresser. She has a whole drawer just full of hats. Because hats are easy to make in that they don't take as much time as others. So I was like, I don't know where the hat is, but Tamaris has a drawer full of hats. And so here we are. I literally grabbed the first thing that wouldn't clash with this sweatshirt. So, I haven't even said hello. Hi, I'm Brittany. This is Hualian. Welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things, and sometimes we read them. And we are in the middle of the ongoing saga that is Heaven Official's Blessing, the official translation, and we are starting Volume 3 today. And let me tell you, Volume 3 has some stuff to live up to. Because Volume 2 was something else. Particularly the ending, like I'm talking the last 4 or 5 pages. Volume 3 has its word cut out for it. That's going to be a tough ending to beat. For me, personally. Because it literally summed up the life philosophy that I aspire to. In like 10 words, maybe? Not to mention everything else that happened in Volume 2. Like, I can't give, like, a really efficient recap because my memory has a lot of holes in it. But, we got some more background on the very long life of Shi Lian. We got some background on Hua Cheng that was rather surprising. And we found out just how far back, they go in terms of their relationship and when they met. That was the biggest that I still haven't processed, as you can see. And so now Volume 2 ends with a very long like flashback towards for when Shi Lian and Hua Cheng kind of first met, and also it's like Shi Lian like pre his first ascendance. So a while ago, and we got to see him like when he was just the little prince running around and very very talented, had not risen, had not fallen, had not none of that. And super fascinating. Now, I have no idea where Volume 3 is going to kick off. I just know that it's like 400 pages, which is why actually these streams are ideally going to be starting at 3 p.m. this go around instead of our typical 3:30. So we actually have 2-hour live streams in our future. You will notice that it started at 3:15 today. That's because my brain, my poor ADD brain, has a very bad habit of being like, okay, new volume for an MXTX book, live streams tomorrow. Like, that's great. Awesome. I'm totally ready. It's fine. It's a reading stream. And then I realized literally 20 minutes before 3 p.m., before I've done anything else to get ready, that haven't made a thumbnail or set up the stream at all. Every single time it throws me into a dead run, into a mad dash. But we get there. So it started at 3:15 today. My apologies. We will be starting at 3 p.m. As the new normal, really, especially if the volumes keep being this long. Can you tell I'm excited? I've been rambling for 5 minutes. But at least we know that people are in here now. I always like to give them a couple of minutes to get the notification that Gaywatch is live and to hop on in if they feel like it. So, Volume 3, Heaven Official's Blessing. I actually have the bookmark ready nearby. I don't think we'll need to take a break at all. So let's just dive. Let's just go. I have no idea if we're even, I mean, I feel like we'll be no longer in the flashback, but who knows? It's MXTX. If you think you know, you're fooling yourself. So, chapter 28. Fishing for offerings, the boar meets the crown prince. Not boar as at the animal, but boar as in BOOR, which describes a specific type of person. Unveil. With that booming announcement, an enormous bright red brocade dropped to the ground. Roaring cheers erupted from the crowd of thousands, shooting straight to the heavens. This was a divine statue of the crown prince, crafted in gold. It held a sword in one hand and a flower in the other, symbolizing the virtues of the prince himself. The power to end the world, but with a heart as gentle as a flower. The face of that statue was soft and beautiful, with long, elegant brows and thin, clean lips that curved slightly with a ghost of a smile. One could describe it as affectionate, but not frivolous, neutral, but not indifferent. It was a compassionate and handsome face. This was the 8,000th temple of the Crown Prince within the kingdom of Shanlei. 3 years after Ascension, there were already 8,000 temples raised in his name. Such a passionate following was unheard of in all of history and likely would never be rivaled in the future. True, he was the one and only. And note how he's built on compassion and kindness. Slightly popular with people. I don't know if... However, this 8,000th temple couldn't boast the most glamorous divine statue of the Crown Prince. The first palace of Shanlei was built on the summit of Mount Taisang, where the Crown Prince lived and trained in his youth, which had been renamed to Crown Prince Summit. It was also there that the first divine statue of the Crown Prince was sculpted, which the king himself personally unveiled. That divine statue of the Crown Prince was over 15 meters high, its craftsmanship legendary. Rather than simply settling for gilding its surface, it was built entirely of pure, solid gold, truly worthy to be called golden. The crowds of devotees were endless within the palace of Shanlei, and so dense that they even spilled over the building's threshold. The incense vessel stationed before the palace was stuffed to bursting with incense sticks, both long and short. Out of necessity alone, the palace's donation box was built much bigger and stockier than average. If it hadn't been built so large, it would have been filled with offerings before the day was over, and those who came later wouldn't be able to donate. In the courtyard of the temple, there was a clear pond which was swimming with thrown coins that shimmered brightly in the water. Because of all the coins being thrown by devotees, many of the old turtles residing in the pond didn't dare to peep their heads out anymore, with those projectiles constantly bouncing off their shells. No matter how the temple's resident cultivators asked people not to do it, their efforts were fruitless. Plum trees bloomed in abundance within the massive red walls of the temple, their branches tied with countless bright red prayer ribbons. They painted a vibrant scene, waves of flowing crimson amongst a sea of blossoms. Just lingering on that image there for reasons. And in the interior of the temple, Shilian sat with upright poise, just below his own divine statue. He watched over the milling crowd. No one could see him, but he could see and hear their chatter. How come the temple of the Crown Prince doesn't have any cushions for us to prostrate? Yeah, even the temple master said we can't prostrate. The temple's already unveiled, so what's going on? This must be your first time at a palace of Shanlei. All palaces of Shanlei are like this. I heard that after His Highness ascended, he sent dreams to many temple donors, and to this very temple's master, telling them not to have devotees prostrate. So none of the Crown Prince temples have places to do so. Although no one could see him, Shilian nodded. However, a few of the visitors laughed. Where's the logic in that? Aren't we meant to prostrate before gods? That must just be a rumor. Shilian made a confused noise. That's right, we must kneel, another visitor agreed. Only by kneeling can we show our sincerity, right? Thus, one took the lead and knelt down. Soon after, many others followed suit and knelt on the ground. The hundreds and thousands of people squished inside and outside of the great hall all started kowtowing before the divine statue, their forms rising and falling, muttering as they silently prayed for blessings. Shilian wordlessly slunk away. Never mind, we'll take it slowly, he thought. The next moment, a great cacophony of voices came crashing down on him from all around like a massive wave. Achieve a high score! A high score! This year I must achieve a high score. If I get it, I will fulfill the vow I swore to you. I pray for safe travels. The girl I like fancies my Shishang. Please make him uglier. Please, I beg you. There was a footnote here somewhere that I missed in my excitement. About high score. Achieving a high score. High score refers to the imperial state exam. High scores would be placed in various government positions. When praying to a deity for something, it was folk custom to vow to do something if your desire was granted, usually to make a donation. Pardon me. Cough left over from asthma. It's not so bad sometimes. Fuck, I refuse to believe that I can't give birth to a big chubby brat. There were all kinds of prayers. Shilian was getting a massive headache just listening and hurriedly cast a spell with the hand seal, blocking out the voices entirely. Silence had only just fallen when there was a sudden shout, and a man clad in black came dashing out from the back of the palace, his hands covering his ears. What the hell are these prayers? He roared. The worshippers didn't notice the man and continued their kowtowing. Shilian sighed and patted his shoulder. Thanks for your hard work, Fengshin, he said with a smile. Such an exuberant palace of Shanlei. Every day Shilian heard prayers that numbered in the thousands. At first he charged forth with a vigor born from the novelty of this new position. He didn't care whether the matters were big or small. He worked through each one personally. But after a while, there really were way too many prayers coming in, so he divided the work and tossed some into the laps of Fengshin and Muqing. After reviewing the prayers to determine which were within their purview and which could be ignored, they would pass the important matters back to him. Once Muqing finished his review, he would report back without ever voicing a complaint. Fengshin, on the other hand, just couldn't understand why there were so many who'd blindly submit prayers for petty business. They would even bring entreaties for harmonious bedchamber matters to the palace of Shanlei. Shilian was a martial god, not a marital one, and certainly couldn't manage such things. And with prayers like these coming non-stop, the other heavenly officials eventually began taking offense. They secretly accused Shilian and his coterie of hogging the outhouse without taking a dump. That is, for taking on matters they had no jurisdiction over, and roping in devotees they had no business taking. To those accusations, Shilian had no rebuttal. Fengshin still covered his ears with his hands, even though the gesture wasn't helping one bit. Your Highness, why do you have so many female devotees? Still seated, Shilian crossed his arms in his sleeves as clouds of incense lingered around him. He replied with a smile, What's wrong with that? Beauties abundant like clouds are pleasing to the eyes. Fengshin's face dropped. It's not pleasing at all. It's like these female devotees' only prayers are wishing to look nicer, marry nicer, give birth to a nice son. Nothing of importance. Even the sight of them gives me a headache. This is actually a really classic example of, reducing a woman's role into which only these things should be important to her. She then takes those things as important, and then the same people who did that to them turns around and goes, they don't care about anything important. That's a really good example of that kind of circular sexism there. I just thought I'd point that out. Shilian grinned and was about to respond when suddenly there was a commotion among the crowd. The two looked out and heard someone speak in a hushed voice. Prince Xiaojing has come. Let's get out of here. Prince Xiaojing is here. When the people heard the name Prince Xiaojing, it was as if they heard the devil himself. I wonder why. Everyone's faces drained of color, and the crowd dispersed like birds. In but an instant, like a tornado had blown past, most of the worshippers who were paying respects in the hall had fled. Soon after, a young man crossed the threshold. He had a decadent sort of appearance, lavishly dressed in brocade and a cape, and he swaggered forward with a glazed offering lamp in his hands. His face resembled Xilian's as long as you didn't look at his eyes, but upon seeing that arrogant, conceited gaze, one could easily discern between the two. It was none other than Qirong. Qirong had reached the age of 17 or 18 by now, and had matured in both his appearance and bearing. He had finally managed to put on an air of nobility, at least somewhat. He stepped through the doors, but forbade the entry of any member of his retinue. Holding the lamp with both hands, he crossed into the great hall and swept aside his cape before kneeling on the clean floors. He raised the lamp to his forehead and prostrated solemnly. The two on top of the altar shared a look. Feng Xin smacked his lips, and Xilian understood the annoyance in his eyes. 3 years ago, when Xilian first left the imperial capital to travel the world, Qirong was still in detention. Upon his return, he hadn't yet had a chance to see his little cousin before he suddenly and rumblingly ascended in his sleep that very night. Over the last 3 years, Xilian sent a number of dreams to his parents, the state preceptor, and others. He also sent one to Qirong, admonishing him to be kind to others from then on, to keep his behavior in check and avoid causing trouble. Thus, Qirong had been actively commissioning the construction of temples everywhere and offering donations and lamps for good merits. Oh yeah, I trust that. Although he worked hard, sincere to the bone, he would still stir up trouble every now and then, and Feng Xin was the one who'd have to clean up after him. Because of this, Xilian could understand Feng Xin's irritation. On the floor, Qirong finished paying his respects and started talking, or rather, whining, aloud. Cousin Crown Prince, this is the 500th light I've offered. I'm such a loyal little brother, so when will you come see me? Even a dream would be fine. Yifu and Yimu both miss you dearly, but you ignore us. Truly high and mighty, and cold. He did not notice that Feng Xin was standing right there, reminding Xilian of the rules about such things. Ignore him. The Heavenly Emperor told you that unless it's a matter of great import, heavenly officials are not allowed to show themselves before mortals without permission. Families especially must be avoided. Don't worry, I know, Xilian said. Qirong rose to his feet holding the lamp, reached for a brush, and started writing on the lamp with his head lowered. Since both Xilian and Feng Xin could both distinctively recall all their past traumas with Qirong, they couldn't help approaching him to check what he was writing. When they saw that it was something normal, like I pray for the country's prosperity and good weather, and not a prayer for some family to be beheaded before the whole marketplace, or something similar, the two breathed a sigh of relief. Watching Qirong write stroke after stroke so carefully and properly, Xilian was reminded of something. When Qirong first returned to the palace with his mother, there was an incident. A group of royals and nobles were traveling to Mount Taiseng to pray for blessings. Qirong's mother had only just escaped back to the palace in shame after eloping with a vulgar peasant, and since then she hadn't dared to show her face. Nonetheless, she still wanted blessings for her son and to have him experience the outside world rather than being shut inside with her and turning into an ignorant nobody. And so she begged the queen to take Qirong along. Although attempts were made to keep things under wraps, royal scandals always shot out faster than an arrow. There wasn't anyone in the imperial capital who didn't know what had happened to that mother and her son. Thus, many of the noble children on the trip deliberately left Qirong out, not playing with him or talking to him. Xilian saw a swing set and ran over to play, and all the children of the same age ran after him. They took turns pushing the crown prince on the swings and considered it an honorable task. When Shilian swung to the highest point, he inadvertently looked down and saw Chirong hiding in the queen's shadow, head peeking out and eyes watching him with envy. Once they reached the Palace of Divine Might and offered their lights, the grown-ups went to beg the state preceptor for fortunes, or for the deciphering thereof, or conversed amongst themselves. This left the children alone in the hall to offer up small lamps and play. It was Chirong's first time meeting the queen, and he didn't know she had already offered a light in his and his mother's name. He saw how beautiful the lamps were and wanted to offer one up for blessings too. He was young and didn't understand much, so he asked those around him how to write words of prayer for his mother. But the children from Chirong's branch of the family detested him, having been influenced by their elders into the belief that both mother and son had shamed the family. And so, they decided to trick him. Shilian had been focused on writing on his own lamp, but when he finally put down his brush, he heard giggling from behind him that didn't sound kind. He turned his head and was greeted by the sight of Chirong with his hands covered in ink. The boy was holding a lamp like a precious treasure, his face bright with a smile. He was about to offer the light, but on that lamp, these were the words written in ugly scribbles. "I pray that my mother and I return soon to the heavens. Chirong." Shilian flew into a rage and broke that lamp on the spot. He himself wasn't very old at the time, but all the noble children present fell to their knees in terror, too afraid to speak. Once he'd regained his composure, Shilian personally rewrote a prayer on a new lamp for Chirong, and no one dared play any tricks after that. Later, when they descended the mountain, Shilian went on the swings again. This time, Chirong emerged from behind the queen and pushed him of his own initiative. He was shorter than Shilian, but he pushed especially enthusiastically. He still gazed at him from below, except now his gaze had transformed from envy into one of worship. How many little boys is Shilian just going to, like, transform with his kindness? Okay. Although that does bring Chirong and Huachong into certain, foil territory. Oh, no, I got so excited I lost my place. There we are. After that, he became Shilian's tail, wagging along behind his cousin Crown Prince. It must be said that Chirong had once been fairly normal, but somehow and somewhere along the way, he went progressively further astray. I want the details, but I don't want the details, That being said, in the past 3 years, Shilian had to deal with too many people and too many matters, so he had no time for relations of old and wouldn't know whether Chirong had improved. While Shilian was reminiscing, Chirong had already offered his light and was getting ready to leave the hall. Unexpectedly, as he backed away, he bumped into someone. Oh, there's a footnote here. For as he backed away. Retreating without turning and showing one's back is a sign of respect. Ah, gotcha. Chirong staggered, then whipped around, cussing before he'd even seen who it was. What the hell? Are you blind, or did you die standing there and forgot to move aside? Okay, that's actually kind of funny. Like, I loathe Chirong as much as everybody else, but that was kind of funny. That was kind of savage. The moment he opened his mouth, Shilian and Feng Xin both put their hands over their foreheads and thought, he hasn't changed at all. Still the same Chirong. It might have been because he had lived with his father until he was 5 and couldn't help but be influenced by the rowdy market environment and his father's violent temper. But even long after, when the queen patiently tried to educate Chirong, the moment he got agitated, he'd reveal his true form, as the state preceptor had once put it. Ooh, art. We'll get there. The one who Chirong bumped into was a ragged young man of 24 or 25. He carried a simple satchel, and his straw shoes were so worn they were almost rimless and soulless. This young man's face was wan and sallow, his lips dry and cracked, his posture slumped. However, his expression was bright. His physique was thin but not weak, and his eyes were shining. "What is this place?" he asked. "This is the Palace of Shanlei, the Temple of the Crown Prince," Chirong replied. The man started mumbling. "Temple of the Crown Prince? Crown Prince. So this is the Imperial Palace?" he saw the divine statue inside, its shimmering golden light reflecting on his face. "Is that gold?" he asked. Seeing how glamorous the temple was, he had mistaken it for the imperial palace. A guard was approaching to drive him away, and he answered, "Of course it's gold, but the temple of the crown prince is a temple. It's not the same as the imperial palace. You don't even know where you are. Where did a barbarian like you come from?" "Then where's the imperial palace?" that man asked. Chirong narrowed his eyes. "Why do you ask?" The man replied, quite bluntly, "I need to go to the palace and see the king. I have something to tell him." Chirong and the guards burst out laughing, disdain clear on their faces. "Where did this country bumpkin come from? You want to do what at the palace? See the king. As if you can see him just because you want to. They probably won't even let you through the gates when you get there." The man didn't seem affected by the taunt. "I'll try. Maybe it'll work." Art. Hang on, I gotta click over. Make sure you can actually see it. Woo, no, okay. Yeah. Beautiful as always. "Then go ahead," Chirong laughed heartily before purposely pointing in the wrong direction. "Thanks," the man said. He adjusted his satchel, then turned to walk out of the hall. You know what's funny about this? Is that for certain reasons, both, founded and just out of sheer paranoia, I'm just going to think every unnamed person is Huachong. That's just going to be how this goes. I'm going to make that assumption every time, but every now and then, I'm going to be right, which is what infuriates me. Oh, God. I got a notification on my computer just now, and it sounded exactly like the one that tells me that OBS is reconnecting, so I thought there was something wrong with the stream. That took about 5 years off my life. I hope it didn't show on camera. Anyway. When he reached the stone bridge, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Through the clear pond water, piles and piles of coins could be seen at the bottom. The young man seemed to think for a moment, and in the next second he leapt over the bridge railing and jumped into the pond. He was extremely agile, and once he was in the water, he bent down and started fishing up handful upon handful of coins, stuffing them into the satchel in his arms. Since they had never seen anyone who dared steal a god's offerings before, Shilian and Feng Shen both stood in stunned shock. Chirong was also taken aback, but he immediately erupted in anger. He rushed to the bridge and slapped at the railing, yelling, "What the fuck? What are you doing? Someone pull him out! What the actual fuck?" Several guards immediately jumped into the water to pull the man out, but he was unexpectedly quite skilled in martial arts, throwing punches and kicks, and shockingly no one could do anything to him. Chirong was jumping up and down in rage, and none of the cultivators in the temple yard knew what to do. That young man fished up enough coins to fill his satchel, then slung it over his shoulder. He moved to climb out, but accidentally slipped on some moss, falling back into the water with a large splash. It was only then that the guards managed to seize him and wrangle him back ashore. Chirong didn't pause a moment in his fit. He kicked the man, yelling, "You dare steal this money?" Feng Shen was already standing close by when Chirong raised his leg and, seizing the right moment, he blocked the kick. While Chirong's kick looked vicious, it actually landed lightly. Although Chirong couldn't see who was playing tricks on him, he still felt like something was off, as if there was a ghost clinging to his leg. The feeling persisted as he violently kicked several more times, and he was left perturbed at the lack of impact. The young man seemed to have swallowed water, and he coughed a few times. That money was just lying there in the pond, so why can't I use it to save people? Unsatisfied with his kicks, Chirong finally stopped from sheer irritation. "Save who? Who are you? Where'd you come from?" He only asked so he could declare the young man guilty of a crime and throw him in prison, but the young man was an honest soul, and he answered the questions with equal honesty. "My name is Lang Ying. I'm from Yong'an," he answered. "We're going through a drought. There's no water, the crops don't grow, and everyone's starving because there's no income. There's water here, and food, and money. You use gold to build statues and throw coins in the water, so why can't you share some with us?" Yong'an was a large city within the kingdom of Shanlei. Shilian rose to his feet, his expression grave. "Feng Shen, there's a drought going on in Yong'an? How come I didn't hear of this?" Feng Shen turned to look at him. "I don't know. I didn't hear about it either. Let's ask Mu Qing later, all right?" Well, that was the end of that chapter. We're on page 25 for the start of chapter 29, called Toppled Golden Statue, the Boar Buries the Suffering Sun. I don't like that title. That title gives me anxiety. Let's see. Yeah, here's the thing. Lan Ying. This is the problem with me and my brain. I know that name. I know they just told me something. But I'm blanking because it's been a second. I tried to review, but there's a lot going on. Yeah, see, I know that name, but it hasn't clicked in yet. I'm sure it will, but Ooh. All right. Call him over right this instant, Shilian said. Fengshen pressed the index and middle fingers of his right hand against his temple, connecting with Mu Qing in the spiritual communication array. Out in the temple yard, Qirong clicked his tongue. Young-an, so you crawled out of that middle-of-nowhere dump? Barren lands really do produce unruly fruit. Think you can rob the gods just because you're poor? Then I won't steal, Lan Ying said. I will pay my respects and worship this god of yours right now. I will kneel and kowtow and beg him to give me money to save the lives of the people of my hometown. But will he give it to me? Qirong was momentarily stumped. He grumbled inwardly, if I say yes, is this guy going to run away with all that money with full conviction? Thus he replied, His Highness the Crown Prince is a god now, and gods are busy as hell. Who has the time to mind unruly people like you? Lan Ying, every time I read that name... Nodded slowly at this. I didn't think he'd care either. It's not like we never prayed or begged, but it didn't work at all. Those who are meant to die still die. Shilian was shaken. You, so disrespectful in the halls of a god, aren't you afraid of his condemnation? A cultivator shouted. It doesn't matter anymore, Lan Ying replied. He can condemn me if he likes. I'm no longer afraid of his neglect, so why should I be afraid of his condemnation? Oh, shit! Oh, shit. Qirong gave a wave. A number of guards waiting on the side rushed forward, surrounded that young man, and started beating him down. Fengshen was still hard at work, softening their attacks where he could, so it only appeared that Lan Ying was being pulverized. But the man himself just looked confused. He didn't dodge nor evade, and only occasionally raised his hands to protect the satchel on his back. Meanwhile, Qirong had grabbed a handful of melon seeds and munched as he jiggled his leg. Beat him hard in the name of this prince. Truly the very image of a villain. At hearing him call his own title, Lan Ying's head shot up. It's driving me nuts every time I read that name. You're a prince? Prince of what? Do you live in the palace? Can you meet with the king? I'm your granddaddy, Qirong spat. You still think you can see the king, don't you? His Majesty's got a million things on his plate. He ain't got time for you. Lan Ying craned his neck up. Why hasn't he got time for me? The gods don't have time, and neither does his Majesty. So who has time to hear me? Just who should I go to? He demanded stubbornly. Does the king know how many people have died in Yong'an? Do the people of the imperial capital know? If they know, why would they rather throw money in the water than give it to us? It's our money and we'll spend it as we will, Qirong scoffed. Even if we skip it over the water like stones, it's nobody's damn business. Why do we have to give it to you? What, you're entitled to it just because you're poor? Trying to keep the bile down, you know? There was some logic in what he said, but it was incredibly inappropriate for the time and place. Shilian was about to find a way to seal Chirong's mouth shut when a black-clad youth rushed over from behind the palace. Your Highness sent for me? Shilian waved him over. Mu Qing, come quickly. In all the prayers you've reviewed recently, have you heard anything about a drought in Yong'an? Mu Qing was taken aback. No, I haven't. As he continued to manage his own task, Feng Xin snapped, How couldn't you? Refugees have already fled here. It was said in a tone so sharp that Mu Qing's face stiffened. He replied in a hard voice, I told the truth. There really wasn't anything. Are you trying to say that I'm purposely withholding information? Well, did you hear anything yourself? I'm on duty at the Temple of the Crown Prince during odd months, and you're on duty for even months. If there really were people from Yong'an praying for the end of a drought, there's no reason the drought-related prayers would only come in during odd months while you heard nothing. Feng Xin paused and realized that was certainly true. I didn't say you did it on purpose. You always overthink these things. It seemed they were ready to start quarreling again. Shilan gestured for them to pause, feeling his head throb. All right, Feng Xin didn't mean anything by it. Both of you, stop this instant. The two immediately stopped arguing. Incidentally, it was just then that Chirong finally grew tired of watching his subordinates beat up on Lan Ying. He grabbed for a small pouch to dump all the melon seed shells into as he gave an order to the guards. Drag that thieving crook to prison and lock him up. The guards acknowledged the command with a yes, sir, and several of them picked up Lan Ying. Ooh. Let's deal with the problem at hand, Shilian said. We'll save this man first, and I'll ask him about Yong'an properly later. Mu Qing's expression relaxed, and he asked cautiously, Your Highness, how do you plan on doing that? You can't show yourself so easily. Since his ascension, that was one of the rules Shilian just couldn't understand. The heavenly officials all talked about helping the common people, and yet they also put on airs, positioned themselves above mortals, and barred themselves from appearing before them at will. Shilian was restricted at every turn, which caused him endless frustration. Thankfully, he also had ways to get around this problem. Without a thought and without looking back, he reached out and pushed. The people standing before them noticed the shadow on the ground vaguely shaking and turned around in confusion. The next moment, Chirong yelled in horror, Cousin Crown Prince! Shilian had pushed his own divine statue over. That kind, beautiful, sword and flower holding golden statue swayed back and forth, then slowly listed to the side. Chirong looked as though he'd just seen his own mother kick out the stool while hanging herself. Whoa! Aghast to the extreme. Shit! God, clobber me out of nowhere. He lost all care for Lan Ying as he rushed desperately to cling on to the leg of that statue, stubbornly trying to keep it upright and screaming heart-rendingly as he did. What are you useless pieces of trash waiting for? Help me hold him up. Don't let Cousin Crown Prince fall. He can't fall. While he was terrified to distraction, Shilian calmly and casually passed by him and stepped out of the hall. Feng Xin and Mu Qing's expressions were positively dumbfounded. It took a moment before Feng Xin finally cried, Your Highness, that was your own divine statue! A toppled statue was a bad omen, so doing the toppling was more or less taboo. A heavenly official who'd push over his own statue like that was unheard of, a rarity in all the three realms. It's only a big hunk of gold, Shilian said. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't have caught their attention. You two go and hold the golden statue down. Keep them in place. I'm going to go meet with that man. Feng Xin and Mu Qing were still speechless and could do nothing but obey. They stood next to that divine statue and each used just one finger to press down on it. That small bit of power was all they needed. The ones holding it up on the other side had to use every ounce of their strength, and they could only keep the half-toppled status quo, their teeth clenched hard. As expected of true, solid gold, such weight. As for Lan Ying, he'd long since fallen on his bottom, and he now noticed that the guards were no longer concerned with him. He stared at the golden shine of the divine statue for a long while before he rose to his feet, dusted himself off, and hurried away carrying his satchel. Shilian followed behind, watching. Lan Ying ran for a fair distance and entered a lush and heavy forest, then looked around before sitting down under a tree to rest. Shilian hid behind that tree, then cast a spell with a casual hand seal to transform himself into the form of a young, white-clad cultivator. After the transformation, he looked himself up and down to ensure there was nothing amiss. He was fiddling with his whisk, thinking about how to approach without appearing too abruptly, when he noticed that Lang Ying was squatting next to a puddle by the tree and busying himself with digging a hole in the ground. The young man's hands were large, and one swipe was enough to create a wide, deep gouge. Dirt flew as he dug, and he looked much like a very lean, black wolf dog. Shilian was just wondering why the man had suddenly started digging when he saw Lang Ying wipe the mud off on his pants, scoop a handful of water with both hands, and bring it to his lips. At the sight of this, Shilian couldn't hide anymore and rushed out. He stopped the man's hands and passed him a water bottle he retrieved from his Chankun sleeves. Lang Ying's cheeks were already round with a mouthful of puddle water, and he swallowed it down. He gazed at this little cultivator who had appeared so suddenly, but he didn't question it, nor did he reject the offer. He took the water bottle and gulped down its entire contents in one go. Only after he finished did he utter thanks. Since he had already appeared so abruptly, Shilian stopped caring about having a natural opening line. He tried his best to swing his whisk transcendentally, like someone worthy of trust. "My friend, where did you come from, and where are you going?" "We came from the Bay of Langair and the city of Yong'an. I was going to head to the Imperial Palace, but I've changed my mind. I'm not going anymore." Shilian was taken aback. "We?" Lang Ying nodded. "We, me, and my son." Shilian was growing even more confused, but his heart was sinking. He watched as Lang Ying removed the satchel from his back and opened it. "My son." Inside that satchel he'd been carrying on his back was the dead body of a small child. The child was a tiny creature who looked no more than 2 or 3 years of age. His face was yellow, his cheeks sallow, and his head had a few sparse strands of thin, yellowing hair stuck to it. Rashes streaked across his skin. That little face was twisted into a strange expression, as if holding back tears, and terribly miserable. His eyes were already closed, but his mouth was still open, though no sound would ever come from it again. Shilian's pupils shrank, his spirit shocked to the core, unable to speak. No wonder he had felt that this young man had a strange air about him. He couldn't have explained what that strangeness was, only that he was abnormal. The way he spoke, the way he behaved, it was like he didn't consider consequences at all. He was blunt and berserk and entirely reckless, but at this point, why would he need to consider consequences? After showing him his son, Lang Ying wrapped the child anew, carefully tucking the cloth around him. Seeing how focused he was in his action made Shilian miserable. It was his very first time seeing the corpse of such a young child. He asked, stammering, How did your son die?" Lang Ying adjusted the satchel on his back and replied, bemused, "How did he die? I don't know that either. Thirst, hunger, sickness, maybe a bit of everything." He scratched his head. "When I first carried him out of Yong'an, he would still cough a bit, and he called for me from my back. Dad, Dad. Eventually there was no more of that, only coughing. And then there were no more coughs. I thought he'd fallen asleep. Later, when I found something to eat and tried to wake him up, he wouldn't. The child had died on the road of escape. Langying shook his head. I don't know how to take care of children. If my wife knew our son died, she'd scold me to death. After a moment of silence, he added, I really wish my wife would still scold me. His expression had stayed calm the entire time, like a branch snapped from a withered tree, or a pool of dead water without ripples or any trace of life. Shilian's throat constricted, unable to swallow. I don't know what that's like. Moments later, he suggested in a small voice, why don't you bury him? Langying nodded. Yeah, I wanted to pick a nice place. Here's not bad. There are trees to block the sun and water too. I'll go back after burying him. Thanks for your water. He coughed a few times and bent down again, continuing to dig with his hands. Shilian mumbled softly, No, don't thank me. Don't thank me, don't. Just then, Fengshen and Muqing arrived, and they were greeted with the confusing sight of one person digging a hole and another watching in a daze. Shilian wasn't in the mood to speak and just kept muttering a few incoherent words. It was some time before Shilian remembered that simply giving water wasn't enough. This man was returning to Yong'an. Thus, his hand went back into his sleeve and rummaged around. Finally finding what he was looking for, he passed it over. Here, take this. Langying stopped and looked closely at the... Oh, I almost remembered. God, I got so close. I almost remembered. Langying stopped and looked closely at the item in Shilian's hand. It was a deep red pearl, no bigger than a fingernail. Its luster smooth and sleek, polished and brilliant, and soul-stirringly beautiful. Even if he didn't know what it was, a simple glance made it obvious this little thing was invaluable. This was, in fact, the remaining red coral pearl earring that Shilian had worn during the Shangwan Heavenly Ceremonial Procession 3 years before. That pearl had left a deep impression on Muqing, so the moment he saw it, his face changed. Langying didn't reject it. He took it directly, as if the proper manners and concerns of a normal person had long since left him. Thanks. He carefully tucked the pearl into his belt, then he removed the satchel on his back and gently laid it into the pit he dug. Dad will come back... Dad will come back very soon to visit you. Finished, he solemnly pushed the earth back to cover the satchel. Shilian put his hand on his forehead and closed his eyes. A moment later, the young man strode away. Fengshen was bewildered. Your Highness, what did he bury here? He said, Dad, he buried someone? Muqing was concerned with something else. Your Highness, I looked into what happened. Yong'an has never been a wealthy place. Their temples and shrines are few in number. It seems they also have a local rule where those who don't offer donations can't pray, so those who visited the temple of the Crown Prince have all been wealthy. The suffering poor can't even enter. I just violently transitioned from trying not to cry to trying not to scream. That's a unique feeling. Okay. Okay. So incandescent with rage. Lost my fucking place. There it is. Shilian didn't respond to the report. He said in a dark voice, "You two, go to Yang'an and see what the situation is. I will go meet the state preceptor and ask him exactly what's going on." He had never looked this upset before. His two subordinates didn't dare to be negligent. They acknowledged his command and departed an instant later. Shilian himself turned and raced in the direction of Mount Taisang. It appeared that the situation in Yong'an could only be a major disaster, not a small disturbance. Even if he himself couldn't hear the voices of prayer, it hardly meant those at the imperial palace were so uninformed. And that's the end of the chapter. We're on page 35 now. Chapter 30, called God of Heaven Observes Mortal Matters. I'm having a time. How are you guys doing? I am having time. That was a chapter of fiction. Okay. Yeah, we're doing great. We're fine. Mount Taisang, the Crown Prince Summit. It was the time of day when the crowds of visitors could no longer linger and were asked to leave the royal holy temple. The sounds of chanting sutras echoed in waves from within the palace of Shanlei, and over 1,000 cultivators were conducting their evening lessons, with the 4 state preceptors leading the service beneath the feet of the 15-meter-high golden divine statue. Within the temple of the Crown Prince, innumerable offering lamps lined the walls on both sides from floor to ceiling. Shilian descended from the sky, landed lightly on the altar, and took a seat right before his own statue. He waved, and a light breeze blew from out of nowhere, making the countless lamps spin gently, their lights blurring. The cultivators looked up and began to whisper in awe among themselves. The state preceptor, who was sitting slumped with his eyes closed, suddenly blinked them open. "That'll be it for today. You are all dismissed." The cultivators rose to their feet and left. The other 3 deputy state preceptors couldn't see Shilian's true form, but they could guess that some being had descended, so they also departed the hall and closed the temple doors behind them. Once those tall doors were shut, Shilian immediately began to speak, unable to wait another second. "State Preceptor, did you know about the drought in Yong'an? There's been no word from Father, so did something happen at court, or is he simply unaware of the exact situation?" Heavenly officials were not permitted to show themselves before mortals without explicit permission from on high, but there was only one exception to the rule, and that was appearing before high-level cultivators such as state preceptors or religious ministers. Those who had cultivated to certain levels were representatives of heavenly officials in the mortal realm, and this was why Shilian could speak directly to the state preceptor. The no prostrating within the temple of the Crown Prince rule was thus dictated through the mouth of the state preceptor from Shilian. He had originally thought there was some sort of extreme circumstance, an exceptional issue the king couldn't extricate himself from to handle the disaster in Yong'an, something that had tied his hands, or something that had prevented him from realizing that things were so deadly serious. Unexpectedly, however, the state preceptor replied, "His Majesty the King is in satisfactory health. Nothing major has happened, and he knows very well of what's happening in Yong'an." Oh man, it's the 1 cup of water thing. Literally. Oh! I'm furious. I'm furious. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Shilian was taken back. Then how come in all the times fathers visited the Royal Holy Temple, I've never heard him pray for Yong'an once? Not even a word. Even if he didn't get along well with his father, he also knew that the king was not a fatuous ruler. While the man revered hierarchy, saw himself as the son of the heavens above the common folk, that didn't mean he was indifferent to the plight of refugees. The state preceptor replied, "This has nothing to do with his majesty. I am the one who advised that neither he nor the queen mention Yong'an in their prayers." "Why?" Shilian demanded. "Because it's pointless," the state preceptor stated. Shilian was shocked. "What do you mean, pointless?" He paused for a moment and worked over the state preceptor's words in his mind. "Are you saying that because I'm a martial god with no control over droughts, telling me would be pointless? I may be a martial god, but I'm also the crown prince of Shanlei, or did you forget? My people are mired in misery. How can I sit back and do nothing?" After a thought, he continued, "The priority right now is to save and settle the disaster victims. Please speak to my father on my behalf and tell him to stop constructing these temples. There are already too many temples of the Crown Prince in this kingdom. I don't need all of them. And those golden statues, they could be melted down to help allocate funds for the disaster. Yong'an is to the west, and they need water, so let's dig a river and divert water from the east to irrigate the crops and nourish the land." As he spoke, the state preceptor only shook his shook his head, muttering to himself, "Too early, too early." Shilian didn't understand. "What's too early?" "Do you understand now why I said you shouldn't ascend too early?" the state preceptor asked. It's because your people haven't died out yet." Shilian's eyes widened and his voice grew dark and furious. "State preceptor, what are you saying? What do you mean my people haven't died out yet?" "You've already become a god, but you can't forget who you were as a mortal. You're unable to let go and differentiate between the two realms," the state preceptor replied. "You're involving yourself, but you are also powerless, and the results will be an utter mess." Shilian was seated upon the altar, and the state preceptor stood below. Even though it was obvious Shilian was the one looking down, when the state preceptor spoke, it was as if he were the one above. "How can I be powerless? As long as I act, there will be results." "Oh, honey. Every little bit counts. Even if I can only save one person, that's still better than indifference and inaction. If you will not speak to my father on my behalf, then I will seek him out myself," Shilian said. He shot to his feet, but the state preceptor seized a corner of his sleeve, yelling, "Come back! Do you know why heavenly officials aren't allowed to show themselves before mortals at will? A law that's existed for thousands of years exists for a reason. Don't do anything foolish." Shilian whipped his head back. "Then what can I do? I can't do this and I can't do that. State preceptor, there are people dying right now in my land. Are gods not called gods because they can save people? If I don't appear now, then when can I appear? What will my ascension even mean?" Woo! When a good man goes to war, everybody. The state preceptor held him down, sighing, Your Highness, do you know what I've seen?" Shilian calmed himself before sitting again, which is admirable, because I'm about to jump out a goddamn window. "Please enlighten me." The state preceptor stared hard at him. "I've seen your future, and it's pitch black." Shilian looked him straight in the eyes. You must be mistaken. I only like to wear white. I worry that not only will you be unable to save your people, they will turn around and drag you down from the divine altar, the state preceptor said. My people are not like that. They can clearly recognize what is right and what is wrong. Ooh, honey. If I cannot save them, then there's no meaning to me being on this altar anyway, Shilian replied. It was a good while before the state preceptor sighed again. What your father has done can't be called right, but it can't be called wrong either. You said to allocate funds, but it's not like your father hasn't tried. You can go see how effective that's been. And you said to dig a river to divert the waters. Go to that river yourself and determine whether it can be done. Shilian bowed his head. I understand. Thank you, state preceptor. Ooh, that's a page break. Oh, Jesus. We're on page 39, by the way. 39 of like 400. We're on page 39. It's already gotten this real. I realize we're in volume 3. But 39! Upon leaving Mount Taisung, he headed westward and arrived at the city of Yong'an within the kingdom of Shanlei. In the 20 years of his life, Shilian had never imagined the sun could be so scorching and deadly. With every step, he could feel how unbearably hot and dry the earth was. It was like the air around him was contorted with it. In the blazing sunlight, the land had cracked into broken chunks that looked horrifyingly aged. There was a deep gutter by the roadside that seemed to have been a river once, but now it was dry to the bottom, and the blackened riverbed emitted a strange stench. He walked for a long time and didn't see a single paddy field. Maybe there had been fields once, but at this point they were unrecognizable. Shilian looked around as he walked. That hot, dry breeze blew his long hair into a mess, but he was too preoccupied to care. Just then, someone suddenly called for him from behind. Your Highness! Shilian turned his head and saw 2 figures in black approaching in a rush. It was Feng Shen and Mu Qing. Shilian cut straight to the point. Any news? Feng Shen flapped the front of his shirt to fan himself. Yes, over the past 2 years, the whole Western Territory has been going through a water shortage, and things finally blew up this year. Yong'an is the worst affected. The river's dry and the rain doesn't fall, so the crops won't grow. The wealthier families are still faring all right. As long as there's money, food and water can be bought from elsewhere. However, most of the wealthy have already moved to the Eastern Territories. Those who are left are either poor or unable to survive the move. Well, that fucks my plan. I was like, what if we take the people and move them out of the desert? But if there are people who can't survive the move, then they're not going to get out of the desert. Maybe we move the people who can make the trip, and then that makes for fewer people to solve the problem of the water in the desert over here. But then you have a bunch of people who are too sick or who are too weak to even survive a move. So what could they really... It's an unsatisfactory bitch of a situation. Which is the point, and I'm mad at it. I went on a whole thing. Where the hell did I leave off? There we are. Shilian knitted his brows. The state preceptor said my father didn't just sit back, that he gave the order to send disaster relief, so why is it still so serious? When funds go through government checkpoints, each checkpoint skims off a little bit to line their own pockets until finally there's nothing left. Of course it's still this serious, Mu Qing said coldly. If it were up to me, I would have preferred not to send anything at all. Rather than feed those parasites, I've got an idea what we can feed them. Shilian's breath hitched. Forcing his anger down, he stated, I will tell those parasites to regurgitate every single penny they've devoured. Your Highness, did you forget? Mu Qing reminded him. This is not within your purview. Heavenly officials can't interfere in mortal matters. A meteor of ice isn't formed by a single cold day. His Majesty the King is the one responsible for the mortal realm. This is his duty. If even he can't manage it, how will you fix it when you've already got your hands full of countless prayers from your devotees? If you concern yourself with this and that, in the end you'll only bring problems upon yourself. Besides, that would only cure the symptoms, not the root cause. Fengshen blocked out the sun with his hand. To cure the root cause, there needs to be water. For now, why doesn't your Highness have the state preceptor tell His Majesty to divert the waters from the east to the west? Shilian shook his head. I already suggested that to the state preceptor. What did he say? Fengshen asked. Shilian was momentarily stumped. That it's not feasible, more or less, but I realize now that it really can't be done. To redirect the water, we'd need to dig the river, but something like digging a canal would require mass conscription. But who knows how many years that'd take, and it'd only exhaust the people and the treasury. It won't work. Fengshen nodded. True enough. Ooh, distant waters can't extinguish nearby fires. Oh! Shit? Page 41? Shit. Around the middle of 41. Ooh. That's a whole dissertation on who. Anyway, Shilian hummed. But if this can't be solved by mortal means, maybe we can try divine methods. I heard there's been a change of rain masters in recent years. The newly ascended The newly ascended Rainmaster seems like a reclusive person, but I'll see if I can pay a visit and request that eastern waters be moved westward as rain. Since Shilian's ascension, he never paid any personal visits to any other heavenly officials, aside from greeting Junwu, and never tried to purposely befriend anyone, treating all equally within the spiritual communication array. His taking the initiative to pay visits was thus a rare occasion. Mu Qing, however, objected. No. Shilian turned to regard him. Why not? Your Highness, I've investigated thoroughly. The truth is, in these past 2 years, it's not just Yong'an or the Western Territory that's been experiencing a shortage of water, but the entire kingdom of Shanlei. The Eastern Territory is close to the sea and is surrounded by lakes and ravines, so it's not as obvious and hasn't become an issue yet. But overall, the amount of water and rain has significantly decreased from previous levels. Shilian's eyes widened as Mu Qing continued. If we really dug a canal or used rain to move water from the east to the west, it might temporarily relieve Yong'an, but it wouldn't save it completely. It's one fucking cup of water. It would only help them hang on by a thread. Meanwhile, it could very well doom the Eastern Territory. I didn't think the cup of water thing was going to be so goddamn literal, but here we are. Shilian's heart seized, and most of the population of Shanlei, along with its most prosperous places, are in the east. It's more than 3 times the size of the west and contains the imperial capital. If a drought were to happen there... Fengshen immediately understood as well. The consequences would be significantly more serious than in Yong'an, and the number of deaths greater. Mu Qing nodded, his expression solemn. It would give birth to a much larger disaster. Shilian took a deep breath. So, is that what the Sorry, I've got so many feelings. So, is that what the state preceptor meant when he said what father did wasn't right, but wasn't wrong either? That he made this choice? Which is why, Your Highness, that no one praying for help at your temple was a good thing, Mu Qing said. Leave it to His Majesty to decide what to do. Shilian didn't respond. He looked back. The entire time they walked, every person he saw was nothing but skin and bones. Men and children had their upper bodies bare, rows of ribs visible and clear on their torsos, and the women had dead eyes and faces empty of life. No one moved much. They didn't have the energy. The foul stench of death hung over everything. It made one want to scream, to escape this decaying earth and return to the glory of the flourishing imperial capital. It was a long time before he finally spoke. You two stay here and assist me. Deliver as much water as you can. Let me think about this. Fine. Go and think it over carefully, Fengshin said. Just let me know what to do once you've decided. Shilian patted his shoulder and then turned to leave. Behind him, Mu Qing said quietly, Your Highness, do think this through carefully. We can help for 10 days, maybe 20, but not a year or two. We can save 100 lives, but not 100,000. You're a martial god, after all, not the god of water. And even if you were the god of water, you couldn't create water from nothing. If we can't fix the root of this problem, we won't be able to keep it going. Our plans are inadequate. Like using a cup of water to douse a burning cart of firewood. That's the end of the chapter. Yeah, the cup of water mention did not fly past me. Still can't remember who Lang Ying is. Or is related to. But, caught that. We are, deep breathing. It's all right. We are on page 45 for chapter 31. To meet you in the mortal realm, to find flowers beneath the rain. I totally hadn't even. I haven't looked the clock in a. Words. I haven't looked at the clock in a solid hour. Can I just say? Shilian briefly paused in his step at Mu Qing's words, but in the end he didn't turn back. He waved, then continued on. When he returned to the capital of Shanlei, Shilian headed straight for the Imperial Palace. He didn't know why he was going there, since it wasn't exactly to see his parents, and that wasn't because he was a heavenly official and forbidden to show himself before mortals. After he first left home, and in all the years that had passed, he didn't really know how to start conversations with his parents anymore. A common sentiment for every child in the world. Yeah. Thus, he concealed himself and ran haphazardly about the palace he was so familiar with. But His Majesty the King was nowhere to be found. It was only when he went to Chifeng Palace that he came across his father and mother. The two had just dismissed the palace attendants and were chatting between themselves. The queen sat on the side of the bed. The mask that she was fiddling with was the very one that Shilian had worn 3 years ago at the heavenly ceremonial procession. The shape of the golden mask had been carefully molded to Shilian's features, which was why it had fit him so perfectly and comfortably when he had worn it. When others saw the mask, the degree of similarity with his real face was almost frightening. Stop playing around with that and come massage my temples, the king chided. Even though the king and queen kept up an act of perfection in front of the people, Shilian had seen clearly from a young age that behind the scenes, his parents bickered and nagged each other like any other normal married couple. The queen put down the mask as expected and moved to the king's side to help rub his temples. She combed through his hair and suddenly remarked, "You've got more white in your hair again." Shilian took a closer look. True to his mother's words, His father's hair was graying on the sides, and it had aged him a few years. Didn't father visit the Royal Holy Temple to pray just a little while ago, he wondered? His hair was still black then. How did it go gray so suddenly? I mean, you've recently been educated on the situations that he has had to, make judgments on. So, the gray isn't exactly surprising to me. The queen handed the king a copper mirror, but he pushed it away. No need to see. Just dye it black again before the next visit to Mount Taisang. It was then that Shilian realized. His hair didn't go gray recently. It grayed a long time ago. It's just that he's been dyeing it black every time he comes to see me. I've been too occupied listening to the prayers of my devotees and running around, I rarely made time to come back and visit. That's why I didn't suspect anything. This conclusion filled Shilian with guilt. For once, he was glad his parents couldn't see him. As the queen massaged the king's head, she scolded, I told you to rest early every evening, yet you never listened to me, and you even accused me of nagging you day and night. Now look at how unsightly you've become. If our son saw, he definitely wouldn't want anything to do with you. Wow. The king huffed. Ever since your son grew up and spread his wings, he stopped caring about me anyway. Despite his words, he still couldn't help but take a peek at the copper mirror by the bedside, and he grumbled, I don't look that bad. Isn't it still the same face? Shilian was stunned in spite of himself. He'd never seen this side of his father before, complaining about him behind his back with such petulance. He couldn't help but smile. The queen obviously felt the same, and she held back her laughter. Okay, it's not that awful. Your health is more important than the heavens, so rest early today. The king shook his head. I cannot. A number of people from Yang'an have settled in the capital lately. If they want to come, that's fine, but they just have to make a nuisance of themselves and make the people uneasy. It's a tricky situation. Yeah, how dare they stand around and be emaciated in front of people, causing natural concern. I'm just saying. As it turned out, his father's hair was going gray because of the drought in Yang'an. An indescribable misery seized Shilian. The queen nodded. Ronger told me he met someone from Yang'an today as well. Apparently the man tried to steal money from the temple. How frightening. The king was solemn. Indeed, it's shocking. If there were only tens or hundreds of them, that would be fine. But if all 100,000 of them came here to scurry about the capital, the impact would be unimaginable. 100,000? 100,000. 100,000 people? The queen debated for a moment before she said, that might not happen. If they follow the law and keep to themselves, then let them come. Okay. As the king of a nation, how can I take a risk on something that might not happen? He replied. I hate that he has a point. They absolutely cannot come. Looking after a few more people is not as simple as placing a few more sets of chopsticks down at the table. There are many complications involved that you don't understand. This conversation is over. I mean, true, but you didn't have to phrase it that way. Okay, let's not talk about this anymore, the queen soothed. I didn't understand the things you spoke of to begin with. If only our son were still here, then he could at least help take some of the burden off of you. The king humphed. Him? What could he do? As long as he doesn't cause me any more worries, that's good enough. At the mention of Shilian, the king seemed to liven up again. That son of yours, he's already in his teens, but he was raised like a princess. Even if he learned about everything that's happening, it won't do any good. It would just add to his worries for no reason. Let him keep flying in the sky. It's best if he doesn't know anything. He should do his own thing. He's not the crown prince anymore, so there's no need for him to care about matters in the mortal realm. He loves to fly, so let him fly to his heart's content. Shilian listened silently as his father grew increasingly excited in recounting his faults. With a knowing smile on her face, the queen nudged the king. Now you call him a princess. Aren't you the one who spoiled our princess since he was young? And now you want to blame it all on me? She sighed. That child is good at everything except missing home. He was already like this back when he was studying at the Royal Holy Temple. He'd only visit once every few months. It's worse now that he's ascended. We haven't seen him once in 3 years. Who knows if we'll ever see him again. Her complaint had the king turn around and start defending Shi Lian. What would a woman know? The state preceptor said those were the laws of heaven. How can we still treat him like a common mortal? If you call your son back, you'll be weighing him down. I'm only saying, the queen quickly explained herself. I won't make any demands in front of him. Then she muttered, It's not so bad when I can look at the statues. They resemble him closely enough, and they're everywhere. As he watched them for such a long time, an ache grew in Shi Lian's heart. It felt like there was a hard lump lodged in his throat, making it painful to swallow. He couldn't bear to stay hidden any longer, yet he couldn't reveal himself. It wasn't because he was afraid of breaking heaven's laws, but rather because, even now, he still didn't know what to say. He didn't have any solutions for the situation in Yong'an. If he were to suddenly appear, it would only cause his parents more agitation and stress. He quickly retreated from the imperial palace. The moment he was outside, Shi Lian drew in several deep breaths, and it was only then that he was finally able to calm down. He steadied himself and pulled himself together. Then, deciding that action was better than standing around sighing, he cast a spell and transformed himself into a plainly dressed young cultivator. He ran around the capital, digging for information and recording his findings. After a full day of work and traveling all over, he finally got the answers he wanted. Indeed, the water level of every lake and river within the Shanlei capital was lower than in previous years. Back when he was still at the Royal Holy Temple, there were a few times when he snuck down the mountain to play. As he had rowed his boat happily along the largest river that crossed through the kingdom of Shanlei, the water level was just a bit short of the levee. But now it was several meters below, and the residents of the city said it had been like that for a while. This wasn't something that had happened overnight. Before this, Shi Lian hadn't paid much attention, but now that he knew to look, he was shocked to see all the warning signs so clearly. He had originally hoped there'd been some mistake in Mu Qing's report, and thus decided to come and see for himself, but now he couldn't deny that Mu Qing had never let him down before. Once the situation was confirmed, Shi Lian stood there in a trance by the riverside, deep in contemplation. Pedestrians passed behind from time to time. Some nodded and smiled, others looked on curiously, but most went about happily minding their own business. He'd lost track of how long he'd been standing there, when quietly clouds gathered from the edge of the skies, and a pitter-patter sounded from all around. It had started to rain. Numerous pedestrians on the street looked up to the sky. Oh, what bad luck. It's raining. Let's hurry back. Yeah, how annoying. Raindrops beat down on Shi Lian's face and clothes, and he finally came to his senses. It's raining, he muttered to himself. When the people in the capital saw rain, they dropped everything to find shelter. Heavens knew how many on the other side of Shanlei would die for a rainstorm like this. A group of people with umbrellas ran past, and when they saw Shi Lian standing there alone, getting soaked by the rain, they beckoned him along. Young cultivator, why aren't you getting out of the rain? It's really coming down. In his haze of confusion, Shi Lian somehow started running along too, and found himself seeking shelter under a long roof. Soon after, the group tucked away their umbrellas and broke out in laughter. Thank goodness I brought an umbrella with me when I saw it was cloudy, or else I would have been a drowned rat. It hasn't rained for a long time, right? The storm is way overdue, so it's going to be a big one. Oh my goodness, look, it really is pouring harder. It's going to turn into a deluge at this rate. The raindrops beat down on the ground, shattering and splattering outwards. These people spoke in such a familiar, endearing accent, and Shi Lian felt in his heart that this was his home. This was the place where he was born and grew up, and these were the citizens he knew. As the chit-chat continued, the rain gradually lightened. A few urged, "We should hurry and go while it's eased up." The men opened their umbrellas and stepped out from under the roof one after another. Shi Lian still stood where he was, however. A couple of them glanced back, and after a brief discussion among themselves, one came over and handed him a worn umbrella. Young cultivator, can you go back? He asked politely. It's still pouring, so why don't you take this umbrella? Shi Lian snapped out of his daydream. Thank you very much, but what about you? A few people from the group in the rain called out, "We've got more umbrellas than we can all squeeze under. Let's go, let's go." Urged by his companions, the man stuffed the umbrella in Shilian's hand and ran back. The pattering sounds of their footsteps slowly faded away in the distance as Shilian stood there for a while longer, holding onto the umbrella. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of an inconspicuous shrine not too far away. He opened his umbrella and walked toward it in the rain. Upon a closer look, the two sides of the small shrine doors were written with the verses, "Body in the abyss, heart in paradise." As it turned out, this was a shrine of the Crown Prince. Since 8,000 temples had been raised in only 3 years, it was natural that not every one of them was as extravagant and awe-inspiring as the one on Mount Taisong. Among them, there were quite a few that were built by people's grassroots efforts to help achieve that lofty number and join in on the excitement. Not only were there no donation boxes here, but there I'm excited. It's fine. Not only were there no donation boxes here, there were also no temple attendants. The only things that this shrine had were a clay statue and a couple of offering plates filled with assorted fruit and refreshments. His more conscientious believers would come by once in a while to freshen the place up a little, and that alone sufficed for a shrine. To think he'd find a shrine of the Crown Prince in such a well-hidden, inconspicuous nook. Without stepping in, Shilian could already make out what could be described as a charmingly tacky Crown Prince statue, wearing gaudy clothing and with a broad, silly smile on its big, round, powdery white face. The statue was practically a big doll. If his mind weren't so weighed down by his own thoughts, Shilian definitely would have laughed out loud. In the past 3 years, Shilian had seen at least 3,000, if not 5,000, Crown Prince statues. However, not a single one of them looked exactly like him. Even the ones closest to the mark were only about 2/3 of the way there. As for the rest, they were all either too ugly or too beautiful. Most of the divine statues of other heavenly officials were too ugly, yet Shilian had the exact opposite problem. There were some that were beautiful beyond recognition, to the point that it embarrassed him. He didn't really take a close look at that clay statue at first, his eyes merely sweeping across the area, but a snow-white blur unexpectedly caught his eye and grabbed his attention. Grasped in the left hand of that crude clay Crown Prince statue was a flower that was white as snow. Crystal dew clung to the delicate, pure white petals. A wisp of its fresh fragrance wafted in the air, the scent lovely and endearing. The signature pose of the Crown Prince statue was sword in one hand, flower in the other. But the flower held in the left hand would, of course, be a finely crafted flower of gold, gems, or jade. This was the first time Shilian had seen a real flower clasped in the statue's hand, and he couldn't help but lean in for a better look. Something about a white flower is really tickling my... It's like even vaguer in my head than the Lanying thing. But, something. Little red flag going up. After examining it, he realized that this Crown Prince statue had probably held a clay flower once upon a time. Whether it fell due to the sculptor's poor skills or if someone had intentionally plucked it as a prank, only a small hole remained in the left fist, and that little white flower had been placed in this hole. If there was a believer who had picked a flower specially to fill the vacancy, they were a most conscientious believer indeed. Shilian's thoughts came to a halt when he heard hurried footsteps. He didn't look back immediately. Instead, he hid his physical form and lightly leapt onto the altar with umbrella in hand, then turned around to look down. A young boy, no older than 12 or 13, this is 3 years after barged in from the gray, foggy rain outside. He was soaked from head to toe, dressed in filthy old clothes, and his face was covered in equally filthy bandages. His right fist was clutched tightly over his left, like he was protecting something important, and he only opened his hands when he entered the shrine. A single tiny flower, as white as snow, bloomed quietly in his palms. Shilian hummed softly as if he had just remembered something. A face wrapped in layers of bandages inevitably reminded him of the child he had met 3 years ago, though he couldn't be sure of this boy's identity. Pessimistically, could that child really still be alive 3 years after fleeing Mount Taisong? Just then, the boy came forward. He lifted himself up on tiptoe and swapped the flower on the clay statue with the one in his hands. The one that was perfectly all right, didn't need switching out at all. From atop the altar, Shilian could see it as clear as day. The petals of this new flower, were fuller and even more delicate. The flower more radiant. From the strong fragrance, it was clear that this flower was freshly picked. Could this boy be visiting this lonely shrine every day to provide a fresh flower for this clay statue? We may never know. It's a mystery. Moreover, after offering the flower, the boy stood in front of the clay-crowned prince statue. Unlike everyone else, who stubbornly insisted on kneeling, he pressed his hands together and silently prayed while standing. He actually followed Shilian's wishes. It had been, oh my god, I entirely lost track of time. Okay, hang on. Oh Lord, no, but we're just getting to the, okay, I'm gonna have to look for a good stopping point really soon. I just heard the wife get home. Okay. It had been 3 years. Among all of Shilian's followers who had prayed, he could count government officials, nobles, names that were known across the land, and talents who would impress the heavens. And yet Shilian felt the sincerest of them all was this child who looked barely over 13 and who had probably been barred entry to those fancier golden temples simply because of his humble clothing and had no choice but to pay his respects at this simple shrine. Truly an indescribable feeling. Just then, more splashing footsteps came from outside the shrine. A rowdy group of children with umbrellas dashed past. At first, Shilian thought they were only passing by, but they unexpectedly circled back. They clapped and acted like they had discovered something extraordinary. Wow, the ugly freak got kicked out again. Although these kids were all around the same age as the boy in the shrine, every one of them was taller than him and looked like their parents fed them well. There was probably a holiday coming up, since they were all dressed in new clothes and shoes. As they splashed playfully in the puddles by the shrine entrance, their innocent smiles were full of life and void of any malicious intent. It was as if they didn't really understand that ugly freak was a bad term and didn't realize their words would be hurtful. They probably thought it was funny. The boy clenched his fist, but that fist was so small that it wasn't threatening at all. The kids by the door teased and teased. Hey, ugly freak, are you sleeping at this shrine again tonight? Watch out, your mom is going to beat the crap out of you when you get home. Shilian frowned. The boy's one eye flashed with anger under the bandages. He raised his fists and yelled furiously, I don't have a home. I don't have a mom. She's not my mom. Get out, keep talking and I'm going to beat the crap out of you. None of the kids were scared, and they stuck out their tongues. You want to bet? Careful, we might tell your dad again and have him teach you a lesson. A few children even gave a knowing wink. Oh, right. You don't have a mom because your mom didn't want you. You don't have a home because your family doesn't want anything to do with you. That's why you have to sleep in this crappy shrine. Before they could finish, the boy let out a cry and lunged at them. For such a scrawny kid, he sure could pack a punch. That loud war cry sent a couple of the kids running scared, but the one who was now tangled up in a fight with him yelled at those who fled, What's there to be scared of? There's more of us. With that, the ones who wanted to run away returned and joined the fight, pulling at the boy's hands and feet. Shilian really couldn't just sit and watch anymore. With a wave of his hand, an invisible force shot out of nowhere and separated the boys. Then a powerful wave of puddle water surged up from the ground and knocked the pack of bullying kids off their feet. In the end, they were still kids. After being inexplicably sent tumbling and gulping mouthfuls of muddy water as they did, their new clothes were completely soaked, and they were even filthier and uglier than the boy they had been mocking. Their boisterous laughter was replaced with loud wailing. They crawled to their feet and ran off sniffling with umbrellas in their hands. Hualian shook his head. The duty of martial gods was to ward off evil ghosts and bring protection and peace, and here he was getting tangled up in a juvenile dispute. Even though he had chased away the wrongdoers, he didn't feel accomplished at all. His gaze returned to the young boy. During that scuffle, the bandages on the boy's head had been partially yanked off, giving a pink peek at the other half of his face. It was quite swollen, covered in black and blue bruises. It was obvious that these injuries hadn't been caused by the brawl just now. Before Hualian could get a better look, the boy had already rewrapped his bandages without a word. He sat down by the clay statue's feet and hugged his knees close. Hualian had originally come to this Crown Prince shrine due to its convenience, and he was planning to summon Fengshen and Muqing for some important discussions. But who could have expected that he'd come upon this little one? He was drawn in despite himself. Once the summons was sent, he crouched down beside the boy and stared. Not long after, a grumbling sound came from the boy's stomach. The offering plate still held a few pieces of fruit and other refreshments, dried out and probably not particularly tasty, but better than nothing. Hualian picked one and gently tossed it toward the boy. The moment he was hit by the fruit, the young boy wrapped his arms around his head and curled up defensively, as if he'd been hit by a rock, and was bracing for more to follow. But after a while, he looked around and realized it was only a fruit, and that there wasn't anyone nearby. Hesitantly, he picked up the fruit, dusted it off a few times against his clothes, and returned it to the offering plate. Surprisingly, he would rather endure hunger than eat the offerings from the plate. After that, he walked toward the door and peered at the heavy downpour outside of the shrine, as if debating whether to venture out for food. However, the rain was coming down too hard. Since he didn't want to be drenched again, he walked back and curled up on the ground to sleep at the clay statue's feet. Just then, Fengshen and Muqing stepped out from the back of the shrine, drawn by the summons. I believe this is where we have to stop for the day, which is unfortunate because we got so lucky during Volume 2, and that essentially the end of every stream, like, conveniently landed at, like, a page break or a chapter break or something. We got so lucky with Volume 3. But this time we're just, like, in the middle of things. However, this seems like a good spot because now Fengshen and Muqing are about to show up. So we are kind of in the upper middle of page 57. What page did we start at? Because now that we're having longer, ideally, when I remember to create streams on time, we should be getting in more than 40 pages since we have longer streams now. So it starts on page 11 and we got to page 57. Yeah, okay. I was thinking we'd probably start aiming for 50 pages. So we're more or less on track. We'll pick up the extra pages on Thursday. That was the first 50-ish pages of Volume 3. That had a lot. That was a lot. That covered a lot of emotions in that I'm scared and excited. Mostly excited. No, equally terrified and excited in equal measure. It is so great to be back doing these live streams. Thank you for coming along. We are doing this Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to about 5-ish Eastern Daylight Time, which I just realized was a thing, until it's done. So now that they're going to be longer, we should still complete them, like, by the end of the month, actually. Maybe a week into May, but we should get through this in pretty short order, which is nice. I kind of like having longer streams. this is pretty cool. I feel like I've built up my reading stamina to where I can last that long. So I will see you guys on Thursday. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you had a time, and we will continue to have a time on Thursday. Please take care of yourselves. Let me know what you got up to during the stream today. I love hearing about like the little projects, crochet, homework. Maybe you just zoned out and listened. Maybe you had some food, maybe had some coffee. I don't know. Tell me. I love hearing about that shit. Because I go back and I scroll up through the comments of the chat since I can't watch you guys while I'm reading. I'm terribly excited if you couldn't tell. I will see you guys on Thursday. You have a wonderful, beautiful rest of your day, evening, night. We have a lot of international people watching these things. Have a good time. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Okay? I love you very, very, very much.